I've asked Linda, my wife, to read tonight's prayer. This is a very special prayer for the two of us. We actually had it read at our wedding 28
Ah,
years ago.
is
So
this
it's
an
probably
anniversary?
our favorite prayer.
Nice.
So, okay.
O God, my God, these are thy feeble servants. They are thy loyal bondsmen and thy handmaidens, who have bowed themselves down before thine exalted utterance, and humbled themselves at thy threshold of light, and borne witness to thy oneness, through which the sun hath been made to shine in midday splendor. They have listened to the summons thou didst raise from out thy hidden realm, and with hearts quivering with love and rapture, they have responded to thy call. O Lord, shower upon them all the outpourings of thy mercy. Rain down upon them all the waters of thy grace. Make them to grow as beauteous plants in the garden of heaven. And from the full and brimming clouds of thy bestowals, and out of the deep pools of thine abounding grace, make thou this garden to flower, and keep it ever green and lustrous, ever fresh and shimmering and fair. Thou art verily the mighty, the exalted, the powerful. He who alone in the heavens and on the earth abideth unchanged. There is none other God save thee, the Lord of manifest tokens and signs.
Mhm. Ever fresh and shimmering and fair. Great words to live by.
So I'm just going to suggest that everyone mute themselves, please. And I'll try not to be too heavy on the trigger tonight. Thank you.
Okay, so tonight I'd like to focus once again on the world of imagination, which, as I mentioned before, lies between the world of spirit and the world of the body. It occurred to me that some of you may be wondering why we're paying so much attention to this world. So I'd like to address that concern before we proceed. Do we need the imaginal realm, is my question. The last time I introduced, or last class, I introduced Ibn Arabi's three-level cosmology. As we saw, it contains the unseen, the imagination, and the visible. A similar cosmology was present in the Christian world at that same time. During medieval times, this fully autonomous world suddenly dropped off people's consciousness in the West. This was largely due to the rise of secularism based on science. The three-level worldview was replaced by a single-level materialistic worldview that we still have in force. Given that we've gotten along with it, I'm sorry, let me start that again. Given that we've gotten along without it reasonably well since that time, why bother to reconsider it now? What did the world lose as a result? So let's consider an insider's point of view. Saeed Hossein Nasser is an Iranian Muslim professor emeritus at George Washington University in Washington, who has written dozens of books and hundreds of articles, many portraying the less well-known dimensions of Islam. He points out the impoverished reality modern man has inherited from its predecessors. So I'm going to ask Jack to read this first one. It's a bit challenging in its ideas. I'm going to explain several of them before we move on past it. Let me just bring that up. Okay, there it is, Jack.
Without this world, which stands between the purely intelligible and the physical world, and which possesses its own non-material forms, There is no possibility of a total and complete cosmology, nor the explanation of certain traditional teachings concerning eschatology. Nor is it possible to comprehend those mysterious cities and palaces, those mountains and streams which appear in traditional myths and cosmological schemes. Where is the holy mountain wherein is to be found the Grail? Where are those cities of the imaginal world which in Islam are called Jabuqa and Jablusa, and which Suharwardi considered to exist in the eighth clime in that land of nowhere, which he called Na Koja Abad, literally utopia. Sayyid Hossein Nasr, Knowledge in the Sacred Pages, 208 to 9.
Thank you, Jack. So this is one of the first place where Linda said, hold on. There are several things here I don't understand. So I backed up and rewrote this section, and I'm hoping we can get over the hurdles. So first of all, what's eschatology? So according to the Oxford Dictionary, it's the branch of theology concerned with the end of the world and God's judgment of mankind after death. Subjects near and dear to our hearts. Okay, so what's this eighth clime that is mentioned here in the last sentence? Now, that's short for climate, clime. Now, this is a quotation from a follower, a commentator, I should say, on Suharwardi. And it says, the only world that possesses dimensions and extent is the one that is divided into 8 climates. 7 of them are the 7 geographical climates with dimensions and extent which are perceptible to the senses. That's the way geography was in the 1200s, 1300s. The 8th climate is the one whose dimensions and extent can only be grasped by the imaginative perception. This is the world of autonomous images and forms. This is the world of the subtle bodies, which alone are able to rise to heaven, whereas material bodies made of the substance of the elements are fundamentally incapable of this. This is what occurs to certain of the mystics. And most of the astonishing and extraordinary things which are manifested in the case of the prophets and the initiates result from their teaching and, from reaching and entering that world. So, we're going to talk more about what the imaginal realm is. I think that's enough to give you an idea of what the 8th clime is. It's really just a synonym, if you like, for the imaginal realm. And what is this Na Koja Abad?
Oh, yeah.
So that's a Persian phrase. And according to Suharwardi Maktul, who died in 1191 in the Common Era, this refers to the city of non-where. In other words, nowhere. It's a pure spiritual space, what he says, beyond the 9th sphere. So that was the Ptolemaic system that he was referring to, that there were 9 spheres, and that was beyond the realm of the fixed stars. So we're really literally outside of geography that we're used to, the physical geography. Okay, so that's what was involved in this particular pregnant paragraph. Over the centuries, the consequences of this loss have been quietly devastating. Now, let me see who, I'm wondering, let me see, is, how about Linda O'Neill for number 2?
When the 8th clime was destroyed, The Gnostic and visionary utopia could not but become the utopia of those European secularists and atheists who, often aided by certain messianic ideas, sought to establish the kingdom of God on earth without God, as if the good without the good had any meaning. When the Zeitgeist became Zeitgeist, history replaced divinity, and Na Kuja Abad, instead of being the abode of the Gnostic, in which he contemplated paradisal forms, became the utopia in whose name so much of what has remained of tradition has been destroyed throughout much of the world.
Thank you. So that's the view from inside the tradition. Here's somebody who was a professor of philosophy at the University of Kentucky who was writing this in 2002. That's number 3. Let me see here. Oh my goodness. How about Jennifer? And again, don't worry about the Arabic. Just go ahead without reading it if you don't feel like it.
Jennifer, you have to unmute, please. Thanks.
Sorry.
Thank you.
The forms of the imaginal world are material insofar as they use physical imagery, but abstract insofar as they point to what is higher than it. It is more real than our world, since it is not limited by experience, but not as real as the higher world of pure ideas. In the imaginal world, we have imaginal bodies, as in dreams, which differ from our physical bodies in that these imaginal bodies can wander freely around a range of ideas and experiences which would not be possible for our ordinary day-to-day bodies. When we use our imagination, we are not limited by our personal experiences or the range of our bodies, but may extend our thinking in different and novel directions, using ideas with which we are familiar and developing them.
So I'm hoping that that idea of having an imaginal body is something that you can take in fairly easily. So think of the dream body that you zip around in all the time. It changes from dream to dream probably, but there's a fluidity, there's a freedom from the constraints that we have here that characterizes both the imaginal realm in general and also the dream world. So while this is accurate as far as it goes, this description gives no indication of the reality or usefulness of the imaginal world. Lehman's is a rather limited rational interpretation of a concept with which he shows no real affinity. A third, more generous assessment of the imaginal realm's importance is voiced by John Walbridge, who's a scholar who's a former Baha'i. He refers to the imaginal world as the world of immaterial images. Okay, let me see who we've got. How about David Oak? I'll have to scroll this one as we go.
Okay, yeah, we're glad to. Reading number 4?
Yes, please.
Okay, this metaphysical doctrine, which was to be of great importance in the later tradition. Oh, just a sec here. Which was a way to account for a variety of phenomena in which forms could not be explained as being embedded in matter. These included the images in mirrors and the imagination, dreams, miracles of certain sorts, and various eschatological events and entities. In such cases, there is a material locus, mahal, but the images are manifested through it, not embedded in it. It was a concept of considerable power, for it allowed philosophers to accept the literal reality of religious phenomena that were not physically plausible, such as the events of the Day of Judgment. It was far preferable to the radical allegorizing that philosophers such as Averroes, I hope I didn't mispronounce him. Do you want to scroll down a little bit, Mark?
Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry.
Quite all right.
Sleep here.
Yes. Had used to explain such things. The concept was still rudimentary and undeveloped in Surawardi, but it developed rapidly in the hands of his successors, notably Khudr al-Din Shirazi, who wrote an essay on it, and that's John Walbridge.
Okay. So it allowed philosophers to accept the literal reality of religious phenomenon that were not physically plausible. Okay. So Walbridge has actually translated this essay of Shirazi's in a book that I have called The Science of Mystic Lights. Makes fascinating reading, but it's way beyond the topic that we're covering tonight. To summarize then, the imaginal realm is the closest of God's self-manifestations to our own physical world, which is also a self-manifestation of God. It provides a place for the events described by the manifestations of God to occur. In addition, those dedicated to experiencing divine reality for themselves enter its mysterious confines regularly. Ordinary human beings access a wide range of phenomena there every night, whether they remember them or not. Over time, they may even learn how to visit its infinite dimensions voluntarily during sleep or while awake. And I've seen evidence of that in many of the different religious traditions, that is a possibility. We'll be exploring that with Ken Wilber in more detail. Ibn Arabi and many other Islamic mystics and philosophers devoted countless pages to articulating their experiences and insights into this enigmatic world. So for this reason, this evening, I'd like to examine several more of Ibn Arabi's imaginal experiences, particularly those involving Al-Khidr. Now, I'm probably saying that in a way that is different than a Persian would say it. There are at least 3 different spellings of this guy's name. So the Arabic one is Khidr. And the D has a dot underneath it, which means that it's pronounced as a Z. So in Persian, it's Khidr. Instead of an I, it's an E. And then there's another version of it, Khidr, or Khazr, I should say, which has the same triliteral roots, but it's Khadir. So you have 3 versions at least, there may be more, of this guy's name. So don't be thrown when you see something that you weren't expecting, as you'll see in number 5.
Mark?
Yes.
David Andrews has his hand up.
Okay, good. Okay, go ahead,
Sorry,
David.
Well, Mark, I wanted to share something with everybody in the class. You see this journal here?
Yes.
I've started journeying my dipping into the imaginal realm since I've started this course.
Wow.
And what happens is I go to sleep at night and I think, rather than just kind of dismiss this dream, maybe I should write it down. So I've been getting up and I've been writing them down. And I'm finding that it's like growing a muscle. If you do it repeatedly, you get better at it and it gets easier. And it's kind of wild.
Now, are you finding that your dreams you're remembering more and more detail about them? Or that you're remembering more of your dreams, or what?
So here's the difference. I'm conditioned or programmed or trained to just dismiss it as a dream. Okay. And so by challenging that and saying, wait a minute, hold on, hang on to that. So if I catch myself dreaming, and I'm in this place where, okay, I know that I'm dreaming and I know that I'm dreaming, and I can wake up and write it down. And if I don't wake up and write it down, for sure it'll be gone. But by waking up and writing it down, the connection between the imaginal world and this world is developing, growing, getting stronger. And I think it's also a biological thing, a neurological thing, like my capacity to maintain it or to remember it or to maintain the connection with it is developing. That's it.
Okay, Belinda, you wrote a very interesting comment just as David was speaking about this. Do you want to share it? You're muted, unfortunately, at this point.
Oh, I should mute.
Belinda, you're muted.
Okay.
There it is. Okay.
I heard it might have been Ideas or another program on CBC where someone was talking about lucid dreaming and the ability we have to develop that capacity. But then I also remember that Dr. Young made practice of this too, including the journaling.
Yes.
And almost everybody who wants to enhance their dream life practices some kind of journaling. Because yeah, dreams can disappear pretty damn fast.
Yeah, Carl Jung called this particular technique that he developed active imagination. And he is a fascinating character. I think the real story about him is only now coming out.
Exactly.
He's, since his Red Book was published finally to the world in 2009, we're seeing a side of him which many people probably have no idea of. And it comes from his interaction with the imaginal realm. So I'm actually thinking of doing a course on that topic at some point. But anyway, that's another story.
Mark, Jack, and then Ingrid have their hands up.
Okay, let's do Jack first then.
Well, we're talking about this imaginal realm as if it's one world, and I don't think it's one world at all. I think it's well, in a sense, it's one world, but it has several levels.
Yeah.
Because if you think about your own dreams, those I have a very active dream life, and I have for many, many years. I'm happy to say it's getting brighter because who enjoys nightmares? But I think, colors, it's very interesting, in the Valley of Unity in the Seven Valleys, Baha'u'llah talks a little bit about colors. So I have noticed in my own dreams that some are in black and white and some are in color. I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but what I've noticed is the dreams that are in grayish, they seem to be of a lower, closer to earth, you might say. And the dreams that are more vibrant, more rich, I think they're higher up there in the imaginal realm. So I'm just thinking, if I created my own system, and I'm not planning to do that, how I would divide this world up, because I think it could be put in a hierarchy of different levels. And I'm sure that that's what Sheikh Ahmad did. And now, the important thing about this, one of the important things, Mark, you've already touched on it, was the fact that the ghaib, the unseen world, just because it was unseen didn't mean that it wasn't alive. It was very much alive. And one of the things Sheikh Ahmad did, one of the twin shining lights, was he put great emphasis on the guidance that he could receive, or true believers could receive, from the imams. So it was all about being aware of these other realms and knowing that they exist and knowing that we interact with them. Very, very important. Very, very important concept for spiritual and religious people, because if you deny that world, you're denying a whole range of possibilities for the development of the soul.
I agree with that.
Just what I wanted to say about that.
Okay, Ingrid?
Yeah, just 2 points I wanted to make. I mean, early on in the talk, Mark, I think you mentioned something like the whole idea of the imaginal realm has kind of gone out of fashion in the West.
Yes.
But all of the scientific discoveries, all of the modern things that we have could never have come about without imagination, without people tapping into, you know, an imaginal realm. So I mean, it's never really disappeared, you know. Da Vinci, Galileo, everyone up until the most modern inventions. If something doesn't exist now and you conceive of it, you're tapping into the imaginal realm.
Yeah.
And these readings we've just been doing put me in mind of your father and his conversations with a fish. And, you know, certainly it seems that your father was tapping into the imaginal realm when he was, you know, with those stories that he was reporting.
Yes, he certainly was. That's what got me started in this whole thing, which is why I began with that set of stories. How did I get intrigued by this? Well, it was because of the fish. Now, I had a terrible time trying to figure out what to do with that information, you know, trying to structure it in such a way that it made some sort of sense in my own view of cosmology. And really, that's what I'm trying to do here tonight and in the next few sessions, is to sort of open up your own perception so that you'll include something fluid and mysterious, where the soul has much more capacity than it does here. So, Linda, what's the story on the chat? I see Carolyn has put her finger up, but anybody else?
That's all that I know. Oh, and then Bob as well. Which
Bob?
Sorry, I have to rename
Bob
Bob
Paul or
because
Bob?
I can't see
okay,
it.
I'm seeing Bob. Yeah, okay.
Paul.
So let's go with Carolyn first, and then Bob Andrighetti second.
And then Bill or Sherry.
Ah, okay.
I was very curious about Khidr or Khizr. So I looked into the Oxford Dictionary of World Religions and found some very interesting facts. Notably, we know already that he was a mystical guide in Islam, but that they consider him not only human, but angelic, mundane, and celestial. And they even say, according to the Sufis, that he was an immortal guide, possessing wisdom and powers beyond human understanding, and that he can manifest himself at many places at the same time, become invisible at will, and fly through the air. So he, I guess, had a great deal of capacities and was highly thought of course, by the Sufis. Thought that was quite interesting.
I'm impressed that you have that particular book.
Oh, it's very useful.
I really rely on that one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's one of my cornerstones.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's a good summary too. A lot of the things that you're mentioning, we're going to touch on through Ibn Arabi's experience with this guy this evening. So that's great. Okay, Bob.
After last week's conversations, it occurred to me that we're actually interacting with the imaginal world in a very real way. We've been Zooming just about every day here, and oftentimes I'm interacting with images and ghosts, really, because a lot of the faces that I see in front of me, some of them I've met in the flesh, but most of them I've not. So in a sense, you know, I think it was Arthur C. Clarke who said, you know, magic is just technology in another time and space. So in a sense, we interact in an imaginal world as we're doing this. And I thought it was kind of interesting that we're exploring an imaginal world in a historical context 1,000 years ago through the vehicle of an imaginal world that we interact with, well, I do anyway, just about every day. So if it's a combination of the spiritual and physical, I'm dealing with the interaction of some engineering mind, or probably a whole complex of engineering minds who colluded together to put this machine in front of me that that in any other space and time would have been called magic. So it's an imaginal world. We're exploring the imaginal world with an imaginal instrument.
I like it. That's a really good point. Yeah. And practical. Okay. Nobody can ever say that I'm practical particularly, but okay, so I want to talk about Ibn Arabi and his experiences with Khidr. You'll notice that I sent you a handout, asked you to read it or to read the passage in the Quran in Surah 18, verses 60 to 82. This is a fascinating story, I find. To have this in the main religious document of Islam is unlike anything any other religion has produced in such an authoritative way. So I'm just assuming that you're familiar now with that story. That's the background of where we're going from here. This fascinating symbolic story leaves us with at least one puzzle to solve. Who exactly is Khidr? Now, Belinda, apparently, I just saw a comment here, is asking whether the fish was Khidr. I'm not quite sure if that's true, but they're certainly, I think they're acquainted with each other. I'm not sure if they know, I don't know if I'd say they're the same, but we'll see. They have a lot of the same characteristics. So why would Moses have need of such a series of encounters when he's already a manifestation of God? Does this story have any relevance or applicability for ordinary human beings? Khidr became the long-lived archetype of direct divine inspiration who played an important role in Sufism and popular Islamic spirituality more generally. That's according to a fellow by the name of James Morris. Ibn Arabi personally met Khidr on at least 3 separate occasions, and probably more. It may seem to be a strange coincidence that Moses's strange companion should appear in Ibn Arabi's biography. However, upon reflecting on the latter's profound assimilation of the Quran, as well as his extensive experiences in the mystical realms, it seems entirely fitting to me that he should be blessed with such a mentor. The question that will best guide us is, who were Ibn Arabi's masters? Who did he learn to be a mystic from? Okay, so we need to turn back to the readings, and we'll pop up here to number 5. Let's see who. Oh my goodness. How about Bonnie? How are you doing tonight?
Thank you. Ibn Arabi had many and met many. His numerous journeys and peregrinations brought him into contact with almost all the Sufi masters of his day. Yet, essentially, he never had more than one, and that one was none of the usual visible masters. We find his name in no archives. We cannot establish his historical coordinates or situate him at any particular moment in the succession of human generations. Ibn Arabi was and never ceased to be the disciple of an invisible master, a mysterious prophet figure to whom a number of traditions, both significant and obscure, lent features which would relate him or tend to identify him with Elijah, with St. George, and still others. Ibn Arabi was above all the disciple of Khidr.
Yep.
Such a relationship with a hidden spiritual master lends the disciple an essentially transhistorical dimension and presupposes an ability to experience events which are enacted in a reality other than the physical reality of daily life, events which spontaneously transmute themselves into symbols.
Oh, a lot there. Thank you. So I guess the point I really want to focus in on here is that we're talking about an invisible master here. So Ibn Arabi met with, I think, 300 or so of the Sufi masters living at that time from North Africa right across to the Middle East. He knew them all personally and took from them what he could in terms of new information. So there's a group called the Uwaysis. And because he's following an invisible master, he could be said to be an Uwaysis. Uwaysis. I see that I don't have it written here. Let me just type it in here so that you know what I'm talking about. So that's the term, Uwaysi. These are Sufis who derived their name from a pious ascetic of Yemen, Uwais al-Qarani. Uwais was a contemporary of the Prophet who knew Muhammad without ever having seen him in his lifetime. Can you think of somebody in the Baha'i faith that had that kind of experience? I'm thinking of Tahiri.
Yeah, Tahiri, of course.
He never met the Bab in physical life, but she knew him. The Prophet in turn knew Uwais without ever having laid eyes on him. It was to him that Muhammad referred when he said in one of his hadith, "I feel the breath of the compassionate coming from the direction of Yemen." Since Uwais had no visible human guide, all subsequent Sufis who did not follow a contemporary earthly human being called themselves Uwaisis. And it's interesting that this fellow was from Yemen because that's where Ibn Arabi was from. His family's from that area. So given that the master-disciple relationships prevalent within all previous religions, including all three of the traditions we will be exploring in this course, Islam, Hinduism, and Buddhism, are not an option for Baha'is who are exhorted to investigate the truth independently, an Uwaysi's style of spiritual guidance is certainly worthy of our attention. Who do we turn to for guidance? Baha'u'llah, obviously. But what if he's busy? Is there somebody else who's been delegated to handle the people in Canada who need that kind of guidance?
Actually, wouldn't it be the writings? The closest to the manifestation are his writings.
Yes. I'm just positing sort of an experimental idea. And I know it sort of rubs against the grain of a Baha'i way of looking at things, but I just want to try and play this out, see what this guy does, to see whether in fact you may in fact have an experience of something like Khidr yourself, as David Andrews is on the way to finding out at some point through his dream journal. One of the Uwaisis was Abdul Hassan Karakani, who died in 1034, who was an Iranian Sufi. Jami, the famous Persian poet, tells us that he was guided by another great Iranian Sufi, Abu Yazid Bastami, who had died a century and a half earlier in 875. So that's one of the weird things about the imaginal realm. You don't have to be alive at the same time as the person who's guiding. Similarly, the mystical poet Fariduddin Attar of Nishapur, who died in 1220, is reported to have had Mansur Halaj, who died 3 centuries earlier in 922, as his master and guide. Abu Barakat, who died in 1165, who was a profound and original Jewish thinker who converted to Islam towards the end of his life, and who died just 25 years after Ibn Arabi, gives us an insight into the workings of this special invisible master-disciple relationship. That's number 6. So Bob,
Mark,
oh,
Mark, sorry, Jack
Yeah.
has his hand up, and Heather.
Okay, let's do that. Jack first and then Heather.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to mention, I mentioned colors a moment ago, and Khidr is the green man. He's always, as you know, Mark, he's depicted wearing a green turban. And I thought Abdul Baha had revealed a tablet on this theme of Khidr, but I'm not aware of where it is or if he had. But it's interesting that in the Quranic story, it was Satan that caused Moses and Khidr to forget the fish, right?
Yeah.
So the fish is obviously symbolic of something. So what's it symbolic of? It's spiritual food, I would imagine. Now, I don't know, Mark, if you're suggesting we should revive the master-disciple relationship, but I think we're pretty much on our own. It's us and Abdul Baha in the writings, as David was saying. We don't have a master-disciple relationship. We can have friends, we can have mentors, but if an individual wants to choose somebody in the unseen realm, in the Ghaib, that's fine. Absolutely, do that. I mean, this was one of the big points in Sheikh Ahmed's teaching, was that this world was real and that we could receive guidance from the invisible masters, namely the Imams, but not exclusively the Imams. And so it's a potent concept. In Roman Catholicism, they have this principle which is quite compatible with the Baha'i faith intercession, right? In which you turn to a soul in another world. On the Roman Catholic calendar, they had a whole bunch of saints, and the saints each saint had its special power or gift. There was one saint who was supposed to help you find lost things even, and so on and so forth. So it's the whole concept that these two worlds are connected with one another. And that's what makes it vitally important. It's the unseen, but because it's unseen doesn't mean it's not real. It's very real. And of course, in the imaginal realm, this is where the connection is made.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
And your dad was obviously, Mark, very much probably in the higher realms, and I wouldn't say the highest realm, but he was certainly definitely up there. Now, beyond that, there's the angels and the manifestations, and then you keep going in the Arc of Ascent, and you can only go so far because God is hidden in the Ama, in the cloud. So.
Okay, I've forgotten who was next, Linda. Sorry.
It's Heather.
Oh, it's Heather. Okay, sorry, Heather.
Jack has mentioned intercession, and I was wondering, and I can understand Elijah, but why was Saint George singled out? I didn't think he was like a major saint.
Jack, do you know?
Well, I've never made a special study of this question, Heather, but you know, if you want to joke about this, Khidr is the jolly green giant. He's the green man. And
Oh,
this sorry for the comparison, but this sacred story, this myth made its way to Europe somehow. Like, we know that ideas are contagious, right?
mhm.
Ideas are like viruses, and they spread all around the world. And I've never made a study of this, but I think the green man made it to Europe and was somehow connected with Saint George, who slayed the dragon, of course, right?
Okay,
Dragon is a huge fish. I mean, I don't know. I've never
okay.
investigated the ramifications, but I think it made its way to Europe and then took on various permutations there.
And my other question, or Dergam actually may know this, is wasn't there there was a group who became Baha'is in Yemen? Were they a group that were connected with the Sufis? Or were they just like anybody? Or was it, I thought it was a specific sect who became very interested in the faith, but I could be wrong.
Well, they were not Sufis,
Okay.
but it was a group of Muslims. They used to be called, in Arabic, you say Quraniyun, which mean those who believe in Quran only, okay? And they found facts from Quran about the manifestation of God of today, which is Baha'u'llah, by themselves. And they were, now I think there's about 1,000 and more than that. And the interesting thing is that after they believed in this, they had not seen a Baha'i yet. So by chance, they were in the capital. They meet this person they find out that he's a Baha'i. Then they tell him the story. That's how, it grew and so on. But they were not Sufis as such, no. It's a group. In Egypt, there were some of them also, but it's called Quraniyun. Quraniyun means, how do you say, like you say in English, for example, like those who believe in Quran only. Let's put it this way. No Sunnah, no Sharia, no any tradition and so on. Only Quran.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, are we ready to go on? Oh, David's
Mark,
got his
David,
hand up.
yeah, David.
Okay, David.
Just a quick one. I guess when I was talking about the writings of Baha'u'llah or any manifestation of God, that it's not just the words, but it evokes spirit. Mm-hmm. And that spirit enlightens you. And secondly, well, Shoghi Effendi had mentioned that people who are immersed in the writings of Baha'u'llah, are given insights into things through that process. And secondly, it says about pure and holy souls that go to the next world. And he says these are the source of all discoveries and advancements in this world. So even though we might not have a special or know of a master or somebody like that, we are always being influenced from the next world by people we don't know who they are.
Well, I'm wondering, I guess what I'm doing, I really like what you've just said. I guess what I'm suggesting is that maybe it's possible through the kind of spiritual exercises that we were talking about earlier, for instance, that have to do with strengthening lucid dreaming. Maybe it is possible to develop those capacities so that you do know who it is that's getting in touch with you, who is planting that seed of a new idea in you. That's one of the intriguing possibilities that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I never thought of that, but I think that's a very, very interesting point.
It's a matter of developing our own subtle perceptions, I think, more than anything else.
Yes.
Paying attention, as David was saying, that's very important to start with. But gradually over time, I think you become attuned to some of the message that you're receiving. And they probably tend to come from only a few people who are interested in the same things you are. So if you're a scientist, it'll be some other scientist who's passed on who would be prodding you with a new idea. Or if you're a poet, maybe it's Roger White who's getting in touch with you. That kind of thing. Okay, I want to move on because we've got a fair amount of material yet. Now, I was hoping that maybe Ingrid could read number 6 for us. I better pop it up on the screen. That's going to be hard otherwise. There it is.
Okay, yep. Some souls have learned everything from invisible guides known only to themselves. The ancient sages taught that for each individual soul, or perhaps for a number of souls with the same nature and affinity, there is a being of the spiritual world who, throughout their existence, adopts a special solicitude and tenderness toward that soul or group of souls. It is he who initiates them into knowledge, protects, guides, defends, comforts them, brings them to final victory. And it is this being whom the sages called the perfect nature. And it is this friend, this defender and protector, who in religious language is called the angel. It's from Henry Corbin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ingrid.
Mark, that the perfect angel nature, sorry, perfect angel. That was one of the concepts of Suhurardi, I believe. I read that in Corbin recently.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And we're going to talk more about the angel in a little bit yet. So I wanted to focus on trans-historical time for a second. This unusual relationship with an invisible guide highlights the radically different nature of time in the imaginal realm, as I've already mentioned. Henri Corbin has teased out some of its implications for us in number 7. Oh, let me see. Carolyn, are you available?
Okay, now I am. Whatever name we may give to the disciple's relationship with his personal invisible guide, the events it determines do not fall within the quantitative physical time. They cannot be measured according to homogeneous, uniform units of time and chronology regulated by the movements of the stars. They find no place in the continuous change of irreversible events. These events, to be sure, are enacted in time, but in a time that is peculiar to them, a discontinuous, qualitative, pure, psychic time, whose moments can be evaluated only according to their own measure, a measure which in every instance varies with their intensity. And this intensity measures a time in which the past remains present to the future, in which the future is already present to the past, just as the notes of a musical phrase, though played successively, nevertheless persist all together in the present and thus form a phrase. Hence the recurrences, the possible inversions, the synchronisms, incomprehensible in rational terms. Yes. Okay. Beyond the reach of historical realism, but accessible to another realism, that of the subtle world, Alam al-Natal, Henry Corbin, Creative Imagination and Sufism of Ibn Arabi.
Okay, thank you. So what he's really describing here is the nature of the time that goes with imaginal realm events. So they're not locked in the same way that they are in the physical world. It's possible for them to interact with the physical world at different times, out of sequence seemingly. But I love the idea of the musical phrase, where as soon as you begin at the beginning of a musical phrase, you already know where you're going. You've played it so many times, you know the beauty of it. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on that too much. Having Khidr as your master invests the disciple with a transhistorical dimension. As Corbin explains, this is something more than his incorporation into a brotherhood of Sufis in Seville or Mecca. It is a personal, direct, and immediate bond with the Godhead. Now, don't immediately think about God here, but the Godhead, so it's the sacred, if you like. The sacred dimensions of reality. Every interaction with such an invisible guide postulates a return to the center of the world, because communication with the Alamo Mithal is possible only at the center of the world. So these are major concepts that really I could spend a lot longer talking about, but I'm just going to touch on them as we go through this. I don't want to belabor them. Corbin refers to Khidr as a theophanic person. Now, as we've indicated previously, a theophany is a visible manifestation of God. So Khidr is a theophanic person. He's a visible manifestation of God. Not the divine essence, but God the Creator, probably. It's a special version of another word called hierophany, which is Greek. We need, let's see, somebody. How about Heather Harvey? Did you read this number 8 for us?
Yeah. Hierophany, Greek, hieros, meaning sacred, plus phenein, to show. The manifestation of the divine or the sacred, especially in a sacred place, object, or occasion. In the work of Marcia Eliade, hierophanies serve to separate the sacred from the profane. By the virtue of its connection with locality, the sacred is no longer absolute, because otherwise abstract absolute has limited locality. It has limited itself in order to become manifest. Thus, hierophany is in a paradoxical sense an act of divine or sacred veiling, because of the inherent necessity for self-limitation. Because, therefore, only some aspect of the divine or sacred can be manifested. Such manifestations may be named after the aspect revealed. For example, theophany of divinity, karatophany of power. I'll have to read that again in my head to understand.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So Mircea Eliade was probably the most famous historian of religion in the 20th century. He's a Romanian. He taught at University of Chicago for many, many years. And one of his most famous books was called The Sacred and the Profane, which is where this idea comes from. So what he's talking about here is that if the sacred is to intrude into physical reality, it becomes limited just by the fact that it's now living by the laws of the physical reality it's intruding on. So, and it tends to, hierophany tends to be just one of the names of God, so of divinity or of power or of life or whatever it happens to be. So it's a little bit different than the Christian conception of Jesus as being an incarnation of God. It's a force coming into the world rather than a being, a physical being. I don't know whether I'm confusing the situation here or not. Carol, you have your hand raised. I guess you want to say something about this.
Well, it brings to mind animal guides.
Ah. You want to say more about that?
I have a personal experience about that, but it may sound a little bit imaginal, so I don't know. I know Jack and Ava knows of these. Anyway, it's very profound. Like in 2016, because I supplicated to have an animal guide because I was lonely. I was alone.
Yeah.
So I supplicated, and I did that hours at a time, lots of tears, and lo and behold, it was a butterfly. And whenever I'm in a state of, what do I do next, or how do I do, or how tense I'm going to be, if I see a butterfly come through, and it usually comes about a foot or 2 feet crossing my path, and then I know that things are going to be fine. And surely enough, it has happened so many times that the repetitious pattern suggests that that supplication was successful.
So is there a particular set of colors to this one butterfly? Is it always the same?
No, it just comes near instead of, as a matter, well, again, it's like you say, it intrudes into the physical, right? But I've had having to be assisted, looking to pray, and I would be on a bus, and a butterfly would be right next to my window, so fluttering about but crossing my path.
Interesting.
Like, yeah, different monarchs, white, yellow, but a butterfly. Anyway, that supplication, I think, was successful.
Okay. My father had a power animal. We didn't talk about it very much with anybody outside our family, but he had a lioness that was quite shamanic in its way of helping him with things that he needed help with. And later in her life, my mother had a power animal who was a bear. So once you open yourself up to this world, things that seem pretty strange can become commonplace. And you can start to actually rely on the energy and the guidance of these creatures. What do we got here? Lots of chat going on here. Sylvia is saying that butterflies are considered manifested symbols of the soul in many traditions. And Linda O'Neill is asking, are miracles related to the imaginal world? Can they happen because this world is outside of natural law? I would say absolutely yes. Jack, you have your hand up.
I do, Mark. I just wanted to follow up on your explanation with the difference between hierophany and theophany.
Okay.
Now, Shoghi Effendi didn't use too many technical theological words, which theology, like every discipline, has its own special vocabulary. But one word he did use was theophany, and he called the revelation of Baha'u'llah a supreme theophany.
Yes, they did.
Some of you know that quotation. Okay. So the difference between a theophany and a hierophany, they're both manifestations of the sacred, but a theophany is more diffuse, it's more general, it manifests in all kinds of different ways, whereas a hierophany is something more specific, like the fire on the mountaintop of Moses. Okay, that would be an example of a hierophany. Even Carol's example that she shared with us about her sign being the butterfly. could be an example of also of a hierophany. So it's a manifestation of the divine, like a theophany, but more specific, but also paradoxically, Mark, in the quote that you chose, it's also veiled because it's not showing everything about itself, because it's restricting itself to that one particular form. So in Carol's case, that would be the butterfly. But in Shoghi Effendi's thing, the supreme theophany, supreme, okay, that's the top. So that means that the revelation of Baha'u'llah has just diffused itself throughout the whole world. It's the supreme theophany.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. I want to get to some of the examples from Ibn Arabi's life. Maybe that will make some of this a little more, can I dare say, concrete? Give you a little better grasp of what we're talking about. So according to Ibn Arabi's own accounts, he met with Khidr on at least 4 separate occasions. In each case, there is an intersection of the imaginal realm with the physical world. So in the first encounter, Ibn Arabi has provided or preserved 2 versions of his first meeting with his invisible master in his masterwork called the Meccan Revelations. This occurred in Seville when he was about 20 years old. So that would put it in 1185 Common Era. Now, how about Alan? Let me bring that up.
Sure. This is number 9.
There it is. Okay.
A difference of opinion arose between me and my master, Abdul Abbas, regarding the identity of a person whose coming the Prophet had announced, i.e. the Mahdi. He, Sheikh Arabi, said to me, the reference is to so-and-so, son of so-and-so. And he mentioned someone who I knew by name. I had never seen the person, but I had met his cousin. I expressed skepticism and refused to accept what the Sheikh said about this individual because I had an infallible perception, basira, regarding the man in question. As it happened, there can be no doubting the fact that later the Sheikh changed his opinion. But he suffered inwardly as a result of my attitude. Although I was unaware of this because at the time I was only in my early stages. I left him to return home. On the way, I was accosted by someone whom I did not know. First of all, this person greeted me with a great deal of love and affection in his gesture. Then he said to me, accept what the Sheikh Abdul Abbas says about so-and-so. I understood what he was saying. I immediately returned to the Sheikh and let him know what had happened to me. When I appeared before him, he said to me, O Abu Abdullah, is it going to be necessary for Khidr to come to you every time you hesitate to admit what I say and tell you accept what so-and-so says? And how is it going to happen each time you refuse to accept my opinion? I replied, the door of repentance is open. He said, the repentance is accepted. And this is in Quad Adas, Quest for the Red Sulphur, the Life of Ibn Arabi.
That's a direct quotation from the Meccan Revelations. So it gives you a sense of how Ibn Arabi talks. He's telling stories a lot of the time, personal stories, anecdotes. And so in this particular case, Khidr had to show up and tell him to pay attention to the sheikh he was responsible to at that point in his development, which he willingly did once he found out who it was that was telling him to do this. Okay, so that's the first one. Now, there's a second account that I want to share with you because it's a little different. It provides more details about who this guy was. Now, I'm wondering if Sylvie would read this one for us.
Sure.
It's a bit long, but take your time.
Okay. Khidr's name is Balia B. Malikan. He was in an army and was sent by the commander in search of water, which they had run short of, he discovered, and drank from the source of life. So it is that he is still living now. He had no idea that God had granted immortality to whoever drinks from that water. I met him in Seville, and he taught me to submit to spiritual masters and not contradict them. In fact, on that very day, I had contradicted one of my teachers on a particular issue and was just leaving him. I then encountered Khidr in the quarter of the, can you bring it down, please?
Oh, sure. Sorry, I'm reading my own text.
Yeah, okay. In the quarter of the Kus al-Haniya, one of the quarters of the city, and he said to me, accept what the sheikh says. I returned immediately to the sheikh. When I arrived at his place, even before I could speak a word, he said to me, "O Muhammad, does this mean that every time you contradict me, I will have to ask Khidr to instruct you in submission to the masters?" I replied, Master, are you saying that the person who gave me this instruction was Khidr? He answered, yes. I said in reply, glory be to God for this teaching. But even so, things will turn out just as I said they would. Sometime later, I visited the sheikh and saw that he had come round to my opinion. He said to me, it was I who was wrong and you who were right. I replied, Master, now I understand why Khidr only instructed me in submission and did not say that you were right in the matter. To the extent that legal statutes were not involved, I ought not to have contradicted you, but if they had been involved, it would have been forbidden me to stay silent.
Okay, two stories are the same, but interesting background about Khidr here. He names him. This was his name, Balia ibn Malikan. And what they don't say here is that he was actually in the employ of Alexander the Great at the time when this happened. And Alexander asked him to try and find the source of light. And actually he did. But then having drunk from it, he became immortal, didn't realize it, and then tried to bring Alexander back to that same place, but couldn't find it, strangely enough. So that's why he's perpetually green. That's why he shows up at all different periods of time, because he's immortal, according to the story. So this is an excellent example of the paradoxical relationship Ibn Arabi had with the countless visible masters he encountered during his lifetime. Especially as a young man, Ibn Arabi was hierarchically inferior to Arabi and others and owed them obedience. However, as a Gnostic endowed with an inner certainty, Basira, and as well as having the guidance of this invisible master Khidr, he spoke the truth, and in this particular case, surpassed his master. Okay, so now we'll go on to encounter number 2. I wonder if Peter could read this one for us. This is 9 years later, I should say. So Ibn Arabi was now 29 when he met him for the second time.
I just have to get settled.
Oh, okay.
I was in the port of Tunis on a small boat at sea when I was gripped by
a pain in the stomach. While the other passengers slept, I went to the side of the boat to look out at the sea. Suddenly, in the light of the moon, which on that particular night was full, I caught sight of someone in the distance who was coming towards me walking on water. As he drew level with me, he stopped and lifted one foot while balancing the other. I saw that the sole of his foot was dry. He then did the same with his other foot, and I saw the same thing. After that, he spoke to me in a language which is unique to him. He then took his leave and went off in the direction of the lighthouse, which stood at the top of a hill a good 2 miles away. It took him 3 paces to travel the distance.
Okay. Oh no, he's not being affected by water. He doesn't know the rules about not being able to walk on it. And he can traverse great distances with no trouble whatsoever in a very short time. Okay, well, there's much to say about this particular one. Thank you, Peter. Now I think Danielle's on. I think I saw you earlier. So just get ready.
Yeah,
We're not going to start yet, but let me say a few things first. So from the age of 30 or so, it was Ibn Arabi's custom to practice something called siyaha, which is defined as traveling across the earth to meditate on the spectacle of the vestiges of centuries gone by and nations that have passed away. And you'll probably recall that Baha'u'llah recommends that we do that same thing, maybe not physically, but certainly mentally. That we consider all the great people in the past who are just lying there and gathering dust. All the cities that have fallen apart. Between 1193 and 1200, he visited different parts of Andalusia, which is Muslim Spain, and made several journeys of varying lengths to North Africa. During one of these long periods of wandering later that same year, in 1200, Ibn Arabi had his third encounter with Khidr. Okay, Daniel, now we're ready for you.
Sometime later, that is after the second meeting with Khidr in Tunis, I set off on a journey along the coast of North Africa in the company of a man who denied the miraculous power of the saints. I stopped off in a ruined mosque to perform the midday prayer together with my companion. At the same moment, a group of those who wander remote from the world entered the mosque with the same intention of performing the prayer. Among them was a man who had spoken to me at sea and whom I had been told was Khidr. There was also another man of a high rank who was hierarchically superior to Khidr. I had already met him previously, and we had become bound by ties of friendship. I got up and went to greet him. He greeted me in turn and expressed his joy at seeing me. Then he moved forward to direct the prayer. After we had finished the prayer, the Imam started to leave. I followed him as he moved towards the door of the mosque, which faced to the west and looked out over the ocean in the direction of a place called Bakka. I had just started talking with him at the door to the mosque when the man whom I said was Khidr took a small prayer rug, which was stored in the mihrab, stretched it out in the air 7 cubits above the ground, and got onto it to perform the supererogatory prayers. I said to my traveling companion, "Do you see that man and what he's doing?" He asked me to go over and question him. So I left my companion and went over to see Khidr. When he had finished his prayers, I greeted him and recited some verses to him. He said to me, "I only did this for the sake of that unbeliever." And he pointed to my companion who denied the miracles of the saints and, sitting in a corner of the mosque, was watching us. We then left for Rota, Claude Abbas, Quest for the Red Sulfur.
Thank you. So I guess they do believe in miracles, as I think it was Linda O'Neill who asked me about that earlier. Okay. So a few years later, in 1204, this time in Mosul in northern Iraq, Ibn Arabi was invested with the mantle of Khidr, the Kirka, the Sufi mantle by the Sheikh Ali ibn Abdullah ibn Jami. As the culmination of his relationship with his invisible master, this investiture symbolized an unprecedented level of identification with Khidr. Here is Ibn Arabi's own explanation of its significance. I'm wondering if Durham could read this one. Number 13.
This mantle is for us, Sufis, indeed a symbol of confraternity, a sign that we share in the same spiritual culture, in the practice of the same ethos. It has become customary among the masters of mysticism that when they discern some deficiency in one of their disciples, the sheikh identifies himself mentally with a state of perfection he wishes to communicate. When he has effected this identification, he takes off the mantle he's wearing at the moment of achieving this spiritual state and puts it on the disciple whose spiritual state he wishes to mark it perfect. In this way, the sheikh communicates to the disciples the spiritual state he has produced in himself, and the same perfection is achieved in the disciple's state. Such is the rite of investiture. Well known among us, it was communicated to us by the most experienced among all sheikhs. Henry Corbin.
So investiture. I don't think I'd ever seen this explained as clearly as this particular passage describes it. So it's a way of passing along the spiritual state that you have attained to someone who you feel is ready for it. But you do it symbolically through a piece of clothing, a kirk. Okay. This investiture can be conferred in one of three ways: directly by Khidr, number two, by an intermediary who has himself received it from Khidr, or even three, by one who has received it from the first intermediary. So it can be a chain. Due to the trans-historical significance of the rite, it does not detract from the efficacy of the rite, apparently. And that goes on to number 14. And I wonder if Hangame is able to read this one for us.
Whether there are one or several intermediaries or none, the affiliation by identification with Khidr's state is accomplished in the longitudinal order connecting the visible with the invisible, an order cutting vertically across the latitudinal order of historical successions, generations, and connections. It is and remains a direct affiliation with the divine world, transcending all social ties and conventions. Accordingly, its significance remains trans-historical, a kind of antidote to the present day widespread obsession with the trend of history.
So that was a bit of a theme for Corbin. He was a bit appalled that people were so focused on historical time, linear time, if you like, the rules of the game in the physical world. His exposure to the imaginal realm through Sufism and Shiism gave him an alternative viewpoint about time, which is why he keeps talking about this trans-historical nature. So now that we've examined several of Ibn Arabi's encounters with his invisible master, we're in a position to begin to wrestle with the identity of Khidr himself. I'm taking a note here. All right. First, let's see how the Muslims in Iran understand this story. This passage is from Korban, who lived for 4 months every year in Tehran for over 20 years. All right, let's see who else hasn't had a chance to read. How about Zilda? Number 15. Oh, shit.
What's the matter, Mark?
Oh, I'm just seeing your note. Obviously I forgot to take a break today.
Yeah. Did you
Why
want to
don't
do
we
a short
take
one?
Yeah, why don't we just do a quickie and then we'll
see if Zilda, maybe Zilda has signed off.
do it
Okay, I'll
once we
stop
start.
recording now.